Hey everyone, we're going to be talking on today's podcast about a controversial concept. It is the concept called American exceptionalism. This has been ridiculed by governmental leaders, mocked, almost acting as if Americans think we're better than other people. But these are all misguided notions of this important concept. We're going to talk today about where this idea came from and why is America exceptional? What sets us apart? Why is America a great nation? And what has led to that greatness? Again, it's nothing in and of ourselves. It's really part of an amazing creed that we have. And we're going to talk about that in the podcast today. So you won't want to miss this. We look forward to joining you.
Hey, welcome to the Ron Johnson Discipleship Podcast.
Here we are again. We are committed to declaring the Lordship of Jesus Christ over all of life, bringing His Lordship to life. And we've been in an amazing book, if you've been with us, called If You Can Keep It by Eric Metaxas. And we are kind of coming to the close of that book, talking about some great things today. We're talking about a very controversial topic in America today. It's almost like a knee-jerk reaction when we talk about American exceptionalism. Why is this so controversial, and what does it mean? And maybe that's why it's so controversial, is because people aren't really sure what we're talking about.
No, when you first hear that, a lot of people interpret that as elitism, right?
Right.
We're naturally, because we're born in America, we are just better than everyone else. You know, the whole book, Ugly Americans, we think we're better. We think that's the mindset that people get of what that definition is. But we want to clarify that today.
Absolutely, because it's really not anything about being an elitist. It's really an understanding of what makes America different from other nations. There's nothing prideful about that. It's just looking at the data. And in fact, Metaxas points out that it was Alexis de Tocqueville, a Frenchman, who first coined this word about American.
A French guy, huh?
A French guy.
Yeah, a French guy.
So this was not a bunch of snooty Americans.
There's a bunch of snooty French.
This is an outside observer. And this is what he said. In 1835, in his book, Democracy in America, he said, "The position of the Americans is therefore quite exceptional, and it may be believed that no democratic people will ever be placed in a similar one." So, again, what was he referring to? Why was America so exceptional? And why is it that today, I remember even hearing when President Obama was in office, he made the comment that, America is exceptional to Americans, just in the same way that Germany is exceptional to Germans. In other words, he likened it just to a sense, as you said, of almost like a national pride. But that's really not what we're talking about. And so Metaxas kind of nails down the fact, first of all, that America is unique, and we chat about this, because we're founded on not ethnicity or blood or race, but we're founded on a creed. Talk about that a little bit. Why does that make America exceptional?
Yeah, and this is the point in which I was never taught this in school. I've never even heard of this concept earlier in my years. And once I heard it, I'm like, wow, why are they not talking about this everywhere? Is that every other nations in the world was created out of conquest, right? Some king or some emperor took over some territory and claim it as their land, or it was forged out of like tribalism, or they have the same race or the same background, same culture, so they kind of formed together out of those type of connections. Whereas America instead was founded on a similar principle. It says we all agree with this principle, this document, this agreement, this covenant, right? And that's so different from the origins of so many other nations.
Right. And one of those, the creed is a multitude of ideas, but one of those ideas comes from the Bible. All men are created equal. A radical idea, again, that was found nowhere on planet Earth when the founders put that into the Constitution. Even the Brits would have been saying, what? All men are not created equal. We have the ruling class, we have the aristocracy, we got the peasants. Of course, all men are not created equal, but that was an idea, again, that came from the Bible. Another idea that Metaxas talks about is the fact that government exists only by the consent of the governed. In other
Right.
words, we are the government. That was a crazy idea that makes America exceptional.
The government officials are public servants.
Right. And accountable to the people.
Yep.
Again, that's exceptional about us. I like this too. He says, we do not give preference as Americans based on one's family, one's race, or beliefs. We are a merit-based society where people from every background can rise as they please. And he highlights the fact that America is literally full of rags to riches stories. And we see this, We are a melting pot of people from all different countries. And what I love to see is you can have a first-generation family that maybe left a country fleeing for their lives, even in your own testimony and story, coming to America as a last hope of freedom. And sometimes these folks start out with very little or next to nothing, and in a matter of generations, they're very wealthy. They own their own businesses. They've been very, very successful, and certainly by the standards of where they came from, they are wealthy.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I love that about America, the rags to riches kind of stories that you don't seem to hear about in other countries where there's just not opportunity. Right. And that, again, is what makes America very, very unique.
Well, and just on that point, I know someone listening to this will criticize America and say, well, what about, women's rights, their right to vote? What about slavery and whatnot? And Metaxas talks about that.
Yeah.
And his contention is, yes, those are imperfect representation of this all men are created equal principle. However, their aberration, there is a growing up process. We got to understand, in the context of history, every nation was having slaves and treating women like second-class citizens. Right. So America had to grow up. So
grow into our creed,
grow
so
into
our
our original creed. We had to grow into the calling. I would call it a calling that God has placed, that we were invited into this covenant we're called into, right?
Sure.
So no nation is perfect, right?
Exactly. And in spite of us growing into I think it was Martin Luther King called it our promissory note on freedom, that the Constitution, we had to grow into those ideals, so to speak. We talk about values, actual values or aspirational values, right? Even as a ministry, we have values that we are striving to live up to, and I think that's what you're touching on.
Right.
Let's talk here. This is good. Our Constitution makes us exceptional. We've now been under the same Constitution for over 230 years. This was amazing. The average constitutional lifespan globally is 17 years. So when you think about it, America is exceptional because of the stability that we have. We have been under the same document, under the same Constitution now for over 230 years. Most nations are going through constitutions as quickly as they would go through a box of Kleenex with a head cold. I mean, this is something that is highly unusual, and I think we take it for granted. The political stability and strength that we've enjoyed in this country because of the lack of turmoil and transition. Right. This was interesting. The uniquely ordered freedoms given to us by the founders have produced a nation of extraordinary wealth. With less than 5% of the world's population, the United States nonetheless produces more than 25% of the world's goods and services. So only 5% of the world's population produces a quarter of its goods and services. So we are productive people. We also are a creative people. I thought this was interesting. 4% of the world's population produces more inventions and patents every year than the rest of the 96% of the world. Now that is crazy. Let's talk about that, because we said Americans are not defined by race. So it's not like we're saying come from German background, you come from a Chinese background. It's not like we're arguing the Chinese are smarter than the Germans or the Germans are more creative than the Chinese. Because we have Chinese and we have Germans and we have a whole bunch of other ethnicities in America. What makes Americans so creative? Like, how would you describe, what is the reason behind the fact that we have 96% of the patents in the world?
Yeah.
It's not a matter of ethnicity. How would you explain that exceptionalism?
Yeah, if you ask me, I would say, first of all, we have supposedly just laws, or that's at least part of our creed.
Well, and the just laws give people incentive to create because
patent laws,
their ideas are protected. I would also argue that just liberty in general, that we have the ability and the freedom and the space in our lives, the margin, to spend time thinking and dreaming and creating, no matter who you are, based upon our wealth, our freedom, our liberties, all those things contribute to an environment where creativity flourishes.
Creativity should be incentivized and not squished, right? Creativity should have created by margin, and that's from efficiency. So you need a system of efficiency. Creativity comes from resilience. So you need an environment that allows people to press and push and try different things, be encouraged.
Yep.
It comes from the environment. If you want to create creativity, human beings are creative beings. I mean, we're made in the image and likeness of a creative God, right?
Yep.
So you want creativity to thrive, you need to create an environment that allows. A lot of times people say I'm not creative, or we're not being creative here. It's really less the person, more the environment. And because of all that America has established in general, not everywhere, obviously, in general, it's create an environment of creativity.
Yep. Yep.
So,
building on that, 4% of the world's population, and meaning America, has more than 50% of the world's Nobel Prizes in physics, chemistry, medicine, literature, and a variety of other areas. Our 4% has 25% of the world's GDP. So, this podcast is dedicated to proclaiming the Christian worldview, and we've already established this in previous podcasts. If you don't operate from a God-centered world, a God-created world, there's no basis for chemistry and physics and some of these other hard sciences, because you have a random, chaotic, evolving, chance-driven world that would give you no reason to explore any of those things. So, again, you talked about the word environment. I think it's a key word. We have the Christian worldview and the ideas found in the Scriptures have created an intellectual environment which really encourages, incentivizes human creativity, and with that creativity comes wealth, ideas, patents, breakthroughs, technology. All of these things bring about wealth with them because they serve people, and people want to buy the products or take advantage of the breakthrough, and everybody's blessed. And there's a monetary value to that, which has caused America to be blessed and prosperous.
Yeah, absolutely.
So this is huge. Finally, he says, American is exceptional in that it values the individual over the state, and that all are subject to the impartial rule of law. We hold our leaders accountable to the same laws every American must follow. Now, it's funny that we're talking about this because while that is absolutely true, it makes us exceptional. Our leaders, even the highest leader in the land, must be responsible to, for instance, the same speed limit that the poor person is responsible to obey. Now, again, we realize that is imperfectly at times applied. But that's a deep, that sense of justice. Like, who are you why does a different set of rules apply to you? This is a strong American, exceptional, moment here, because we're like, wait a minute. We have it so deeply ingrained in us that we all play by the same rules, that when we find a two-tiered system of justice like we're experiencing now in America in so many areas, Americans are outraged by that. And we're saying, will anybody be held accountable?
Absolutely.
But that's not the way most of the world lives. Most of the world assumes that if you're in power, you play by a different set of rules. And the corruption is so deep, and all these things that we take for granted in America. Even things like insider trading. Like if you're in Congress and you're on the know, you should not be able to use that information to your own personal advantage. I mean, we understand that that's fundamentally unfair. Now, we're not saying it doesn't happen, but saying it's fundamentally unfair, whereas other nations would just go, that's just the way life is, man. When you get to be in power, then you're a fat cat and you get to use the system for your own purposes. But it makes us exceptional in that regard, that we value the law above the person.
The fact that there's outrage when we see nepotism, when we see the unequal treatment, when we see government officials thinking they rule over us, the feeling, the revolutionary feeling that it stirred in our heart, saying, "Wait a second, you're supposed to serve us." That itself is exceptional because the natural history of the world has never been that way. You have kings, you have pharaohs, you have rulers who rule over us little peasants, right? And America has cultivated an environment of revolutionaries in that way to say, "Hey, no, that should not be. That's tyranny. We don't want tyranny."
And I would argue as well that what makes America exceptional is this incredible thing called the middle class, of which you and I are both part of. Middle class America. You don't find that middle class in other countries, and largely you have, again, the power brokers, the wealthy, the elite, and then you have the people who are peasants, very poor, the working class,
the laborers,
the laborers, the common people. Right. But in America, there's this crazy phenomenon, and you drive around and you see, wait a minute, look at the middle class neighborhoods, the homes, the prosperity, the blessing in middle class is far transcends most of the world, what most of the world can even think about. So these are all things that it's the air we breathe, but we should never ever take them for granted. And it's part of what makes us exceptional, not better than other people, but different. And different in a way that others should go, wow, how are you guys doing that? Or how do you account for that? Or how do you explain all of this? We want to be a part of it. So again, it's not a snootiness. It is actually a burden. And that's really what he talks about, which I love. He goes underneath all of these surface exceptional areas, and he gets to the heart of it in a section called The Shining City on a Hill. He said, but while all these things may be listed to explain why America is exceptional, they don't really get to the heart of the matter. Again, he writes, we may turn to the founders and to Tocqueville for answers to this question. He says it was, quote, the virtuous behavior of Americans, driven principally by their thriving faith in God, the God of the Bible. So he says beneath all of these ideas, as we've already pointed out, is God, and not just any God, but the God of Scriptures. And what made America great was the virtue that came from a people who actually believed what the Bible taught. And you and I talked on this, or just before this podcast started, if it's a creed that held us together, what happens when we lose the creed, or we can no longer define the creed? And I think we would argue that much of this creed is rooted in a biblical understanding of the world, which is being rejected by many, many Americans right now. And so the foundation of the creed if that's taken away, the creed kind of starts dissolving in your hands, and you're like trying to hold on to sand. And that's, I think, what we're experiencing in America today is we've lost the common basis for what that creed is and where it comes from.
Yeah, because the cohesive ties between states, between citizens is this creed, not these tribalistic things that other nations found of, because we are made of many tribes, many different backgrounds. America is. So when you lose the creed, you have no other ties. Yeah. And I think that's one reason why America is so divisive today.
Yeah,
we have so many different creeds.
Absolutely. Now he gives us a good history lesson here. He says we may trace the seed of what we think of as American exceptionalism back to the summer of 1630, when a fleet of 11 ships sailed from England to what is today Boston. The fleet's flagship, the Arbella, was carrying a very important person, a man by the name of John Winthrop, who was going to be the governor of this new Massachusetts Bay colony. Of course, Winthrop was a godly man, and over the course of that journey, he delivered a now famous sermon called The Model of Christian Charity. And I want to read just a couple sentences from that because it really conveys the sense of responsibility that they were carrying. He said, "The eyes of all people are upon us, so that if we shall deal falsely with our God in this work that we have undertaken, and so cause him to withdraw his present help from us, we shall be made a story and a byword through the world." In other words, paraphrasing, there was a sense of godly fear and responsibility that what they were embarking on was being watched by others in the world, and therefore the last thing they wanted to do was offend God, grieve God through their sinful behavior, and cause God to remove his presence and his blessing from them, because they knew that as soon as that happened, to quote him, they would be made a story and a byword in the world. In other words, they would become a laughingstock, a thing spoken against. People would always point to that and say, look what happened to those foolish people, and look what happened to their experiment in liberty. So even from the beginning, this is 1630, there was a sense that we have a responsibility as God's people to obey God and to be a shining light. In other words, our freedom and the liberty which they were pursuing was not just for themselves, it was for other people. And Metaxas says this is really something radical about the American creed, that our freedom is not just leave me alone so I can live my selfish life and do whatever I want and be blessed and prosperous and all this. The creed was, no. The freedom that we have created, the environment, the atmosphere of liberty that we've created is not just for me. I have a responsibility for generations to come, and I have a responsibility to share this freedom with the rest of the world that's longing for this.
Right.
That's a radical concept. It's almost like, wait, with the blessing of freedom comes the responsibility of freedom, and we don't hear that talked about much anymore.
And you see that theme repeated over and over again later with George Washington when we talked about this in previous podcasts when he was a general and the Congress couldn't pay his armies during the Revolutionary War, and his men was plotting to kind of take over the government, making George Washington king. And his admonition to his guys is like, the world's watching us. Yeah. And even later Lincoln is this idea. It's like this is not just like our private decision, right?
Exactly.
Someone's watching us, and we're setting example for the future. There's a perspective. There's this idea of that we are being watched, and we're setting example for the world.
Yeah, I think the Bible says it this way: to whom much has been given, much is required.
Yeah.
That means again that we have to steward the blessings of freedom. And
I think that's exceptional. And what nation is making these decisions, thinking everyone's watching us and we need to be example for the world?
Oh, absolutely. No, but I don't know of any other
king
nation
is saying, hey, you know what? We shouldn't invade that nation, or we shouldn't do this because everyone's, So I think that's interesting.
It's highly exceptional.
Yeah.
He says this idea of freedom as something to be used in service of others is at the heart of the Jewish and Christian scriptures. So, again, it's freedom It's freedom. Yeah. It's freedom meaning, okay, I have been blessed or I've been given resources. It's not just for me. How can I take this blessing and be a blessing? It goes all the way back to that Abrahamic promise from God that, Abraham, I am blessing you to be a blessing to the nation. Right. So with this understanding of the gospel came this incredible sense that, number one, God is watching, others are watching. We are to be a city set on a hill that others come to for light, for blessing, for insight, for help. And that is a distinctly Christian idea. So he goes on, he says, far from being a selfish idea, it is the idea of living for others, of showing them a new way of living that was at the heart of America, and that this was actually a great burden that we shared as Americans. And I thought it was interesting because I remember it was, they called it the Obama Apology Tour. Remember that when he took over? Mm-hmm. It was weird to me because instead of embracing the fact that America is the world leader, right, and that as the world leader, there is a burden that comes with that. Like we're going to help other weaker nations when they're attacked, or we're going to help nations when they need financial support or aid. We're the world leader. That was something, again, that we understood as Americans as part of our exceptionalism. But I remember at that time him going around and apologizing and almost trying to deflate America, almost trying to put America on the level of just everybody else in terms of we're just part of the global team here, instead of this idea that we are a nation, a separate nation, that we need to care for our nation, we need to protect our nation, and then we need to responsibly care for the other nation of the world. It's like, no, we don't want to do that anymore. We just want to be one of the globalists, one of the guys. It really, to me, represented a fundamental shift in what I had been, like the Ronald Reagan days, for instance, when he spoke strongly about America, about America's sovereignty, and about America being the last bastion of freedom. And how we needed to protect that. It was just different language. It was a different understanding, and I picked up on it. It was like, wow, this is a whole different approach to the creed that we talked about. But I think it's because we were drifting away from that Christian worldview. Absolutely. This was interesting as well. He says that this American exceptionalism means that and this was part of the poetry on the Statue of Liberty. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. This is part of the poetry, again, that's on the Statue of Liberty, and it was a reminder that America stood as that place where we were welcoming immigrants. And I think Metaxas brought out a good point. He says nobody in America argues that that we're not a nation of immigrants and that there's value in this beautiful melting pot. What we're arguing about is that process. But nobody is arguing about the fact that we have always opened our shores to the world's oppressed and to those fleeing for their lives or for liberty. And that's part, again, of the burden that is America. I can't think of an iconic symbol that more powerfully describes American exceptionalism than the Statue of Liberty. Yeah. Come, we want to help, and we can help you. And so he says the whole idea that we care, that we help when there are tragedies. Americans are the first to line up with support, boots on the ground, financial support. He says America, this is indisputable. America is the most generous nation on the planet. We even send resources to help build the countries that we have had to fight wars against, to help get the people back on their feet and to help get their nation moving forward again. We even export our ideas about freedom around the world. We've tried to say, hey, our way is the best way, and we've been unashamed about that because it's produced the best fruit. And of course, it was rooted in biblical ideas. We've tried to be that shining city on a hill. And so he says we are inescapably exceptional and therefore inescapably burdened with the responsibility, again, before God, to help other people. And finally, and this is a controversial point, so maybe we could spend a little bit of time on this one before we close. He says, when talking of the exceptionalism that has been acknowledged all through our history, when talking of the burden that comes with it, we come to another concept that is even beyond exceptionalism, and that is of being chosen by God. Now, this is another area that would cause massive argumentation today. This whole idea that America has a calling, that we have been called by God for a specific purpose, to be a city on a hill, to take the gospel to the nations of the world, et cetera, et cetera. But he gives, and we can maybe hit this real quickly, he gives two examples historically. One is the example of Squanto, which was an Indian who actually helped the settlers of this nation to get through those difficult winters, the Pilgrims. Talk a little bit about that story, because I don't know that we're teaching this in our history books anymore, but it is an example that our founders recognized of supernatural, providential hand of God on America to help it get established.
Yeah, I didn't know the history. Did you know the history of Squanto?
I did, but it was a review. Yes, I did, only because I had read a lot of the Wall Builders material with David Barton.
Okay.
But basically,
he was. So I guess Squanto, as a Native American, was basically kidnapped when he was young by some of these New World explorers back to England. Correct?
Yeah.
And then he was free from some
friars. He was captured as a slave, but those who took him in cared for him and actually taught him English.
Some friars, some Christian friars, end up getting his release somehow, and they encouraged him to go back to London to try to get a ship back to the New World.
So again, the point was that everybody that had slaves was not mistreating them, killing them, torturing them, etc. In this case, they discipled him. They used it as an opportunity to disciple him, to teach him the ways of the Lord, teach him English, and then send him home. Yeah. And on that trip back home, when he gets back to his homeland, all of his people are dead. Yeah. They died because of a plague. Mm-hmm. If he would have been there, he would have died. So he stays there, but in the process of him staying there, when the Pilgrims come and they're having all their troubles and they don't know anything about how to survive in the land, here walks up this Native American Indian and speaks perfect English. And they're all looking at him like, who are you and where did you come from? Obviously, this is a sign and a wonder. This man had been almost trained by the Lord, protected by the Lord, to establish this Plymouth colony. Yeah. When again, half of the folks that in that first winter died, and he was teaching them how to plant food, how to catch fish, how to basically survive through the winters. And he said, I quote here, William Bradford wrote in his journal that Squanto became a special instrument sent by God for our good, who never left us until he died. In other words, they enjoyed an incredible friendship and a great relationship where he mentored them and they were able, again, to mentor him in the ways of the Lord. So it was, a crazy, providential, supernatural, divine appointment that our founders looked at as the hand of God being upon this nation. The other one is again a great story. I've preached on this in our Freedom Sunday message before, but this has to do with the miracle of our Constitution. And the terms used to describe our Constitution was that it is inspired. Now, again, not in the same way that the Bible is inspired, but it is inspired in that what came out of that Constitutional Convention was a miracle based on the strong leadership, the strong ideas, the strong principles, the differences of opinion as to how this government should be formed. The fact that it all came together the way that it did was stated by those that attended that convention that it was a miracle, that it was God. And what's crazy is the most irreligious of all the founders, the senior member of that Constitutional Convention, Benjamin Franklin, was the one who gave this eloquent speech, basically saying that during the Revolution that we gathered together on a regular basis to pray and to seek God. And that we recognize that the fact that we're all here today was a miracle. This could not have happened. A bunch of ragtag colonies defeating the most powerful nation on the planet. This was a miracle of God. And we prayed and we sought the Lord and we experienced His blessing. And so it was Benjamin Franklin who said this: "I have lived, sir, a long time, and the longer I live, the more convincing proofs I see of this truth, that God governs in the affairs of men, and if a sparrow cannot fall to the ground without His notice, it is probable that an empire can rise without His aid." Or is it probable that an empire can rise without its aid? What an incredible observation. If a God cares about little things like sparrows, how will He not be focused and care about the raising up of a nation? And that we should seek Him and honor Him and humble ourselves. And so He called for everybody to come together and to pray. This is Benjamin Franklin. Now, again, one of the more irreligious of the founders, but even he recognized, and he made a suggestion that that they would open up in that Constitutional Convention. They would open up with prayer from that point on, and that they would be led by clergy. So here now we have clergy being invited in to the formation of this government to appeal to the Lord and to seek God and to cry out for wisdom. And God answered their prayers. And what came out of that Constitutional Convention is, again, a document that has been alive and well and leading our nation now for over 230 years. So this is amazing. Again, based upon the concerns that these different folks had, based upon the strong differing opinions that they had about government, that there could be a unity and a coming together to create this document. Stunning. And those there, and we don't have time to go into the quotes, but they said this was an act of God. So again, when our founders are recognizing that God intervened, and that our nation is supernatural. Again, not perfect. We'll talk about that in our next podcast. But supernatural. These were the things that said there's something special about who we are. And it's not us. It's God. It's His calling. It's the uniqueness of the creed. It's the biblical worldview from which it comes. It's the financial blessing. It's the spiritual blessing. It's the liberties that we have. We cannot keep these to ourselves. We are a nation raised up by God to be a blessing to the nations of the world. That not that many years ago, that would have all been amen in the halls of Congress. We've lost it. Now, I think what I just said would be ridiculed and mocked, and would be a minority opinion. But that's not the opinion of those who founded this nation. And I think when we take out the supernatural elements, when we mock our founders or we look for their imperfections instead of realizing they were just men, right, fallen men. When we try to minimize those stories of the supernatural because we don't believe in God any longer, we really gut the creed and we gut American exceptionalism. And I think we have, maybe that's why we're here doing this podcast today. We've got to be the ones trumpeting these truths because they're not hearing them right now in our public schools. And our history lessons, lessons about the Constitutional Convention or any of these things, there's just nowhere to be found. Yeah. And so we've got to return to the supernatural dimension of the founding of this country. So anyway, we hope that has been helpful to you. We are an exceptional people, which kind of leads us to where we're going to go in our next podcast. It's why we love America. It's because of all these exceptional elements that make us the greatest nation on the earth, not to pat ourselves on the back, but to go, wow, these ideas produce incredible fruit. And we need to keep these ideas. So anyway, we hope this is helpful to you guys. Spread it far and wide. Please like this podcast, share it with other people, and help us get the word out. I will look forward to being with you all next week.